Usually, I think this is a little bit of a sort of overdone question, but in this case, because each of you are working on things that are pretty new to the space, I'd actually ask for 60, 90-second introduction to what it is that you are building and perhaps why it's important to you, starting with Nick.
Yeah, we're building Celestia, which is a modular blockchain network that focuses specifically on consensus and data availability. So you can think of it as a layer 1 that's designed specifically for modular blockchains and rollups. So providing a scalable, secure base layer to launch L2s, which you can customize and have dedicated throughput. And we think that's the future of blockchain architecture.
Hey guys, I'm Vyas. I'm with the Eigen layer, and we're building a restaking protocol built on Ethereum. So the idea is, how do we expand the scope of the Ethereum community by being able to enable Ethereum operators to run validation for additional services throughout the ecosystem, and push the limits on all the AVS's actively validated services that are building infrastructure to perform different, almost decentralized SaaS modules across the crypto ecosystem.
Hello, everyone. My name is Keone. I'm co-founder of Monad. Monad is a new high-performance parallel EVM layer 1 that is building improvements at all layers of the stack, both at the execution layer, at the database layer, and at the consensus layer, to deliver really high performance while preserving a high degree of decentralization from reasonable node requirements and a performant consensus mechanism that can keep hundreds of nodes in sync participating in consensus. Currently in pre-testnet phase and launching mainnet sometime next year.
So one thing I'll add as well, if there are things that you hear from one of the other panelists that you want to chime in on or rebut, feel free to do so as well. The follow-up question to that initial one is, why do you think what you're building is important, in the sense that what are the problems that you identified in the space right now that drove you to start working on this, starting with Keone?
Yeah, Monad is a project that's delivering really high EVM performance. The reason why I think this is important is because EVM is really the dominant standard for smart contract development. Over 95% of all capital on chain, all TVL, is in EVM apps. There's a significant network effect from so many libraries and apps all built for the EVM. But at the same time, right now, the EVM is just very slow for a number of reasons, which range from the need for a more performant database that offers much more performant state access, as well as the fact that the EVM right now is single-threaded, and there's a huge need for parallel execution and utilization of all the resources in the system. So Monad is a project that is really rebuilding the shape of Ethereum from the ground up, and doing so while preserving a high degree of decentralization. And I think this is important because if we're to have crypto spread to billions of users, then we need much higher performance within the layer 1. And that's really the core of what Monad's value prop is.
Yeah, some of the inspiration behind why we wanted to build Eigenlayer is we observed over the course of the last few years where projects had their entire security determined in their own token. And you ended up with a lot of examples where, when you needed security the most is when it would potentially fail you, because having your entire security in a proof-of-stake system in your own token, in moments of vulnerability, token price falls, community sentiment goes down, and as a result, you ended up in debt spirals. And so we wanted to create a mechanism by which these Ethereum applications could use Ethereum validators and Ethereum stake to be able to essentially have backstops for economic security and kind of build a more robust system that encouraged value accrual back to the Ethereum community rather than value being extracted away and fragmenting itself into all these sub-communities.
So why Celestia is important is that it all started with this insight that you could build blockchains in a fundamentally new way, where instead of trying to do everything within one single protocol, like a monolithic chain, you can actually decouple different layers of the stack. And most importantly, you can decouple execution from consensus and data availability. And when you do that, you solve a bunch of really important problems like big blocks. You can scale your block size without increasing the node requirements. You can customize. You can enable developers to deploy their own blockchains like they would a smart contract, giving them ownership of the economics, giving them the ability to customize their execution model. And then last but not least is like decentralization. So using data availability sampling, people can run something called a light node, meaning that similar to the dream of Ethereum with home stakers, with Celestia you can actually run a node and verify the chain directly from your smartphone or whatever kind of device that you have. And we think that that's the level of decentralization that we need if we want to really put the entire world on chain. So those three problems are why I think Celestia is important.
Okay, so starting with Vyas, why or why not can these three different things coexist in the current crypto state? Do you think that there is space for these different types of solutions, the monolithic, the data availability layer, the AVS layer, or is it going to be a winner-take-all? And if that's not your stance, what do you think needs to happen to crypto so that there is room for all of these solutions to succeed?
I absolutely believe that this isn't a zero-sum game. I think there are going to be multiple winners. I think there's multiple ways of looking at that, and the reality is, if we want the overall total addressable market of crypto to go to 50, 100 trillion, then we're going to need different solutions to be focused on different things. And there is this conversation about monolithic versus modular, but I think we're all building within the modular ecosystem. The AVS, the AVS stack itself is like quite modular. Like I said, we're trying to build decentralized SaaS modules and create a platform by which people can expand. So with Monad focused on parallelized EVM, which is expanding throughput at the execution layer. Celestia focused on data availability. We have Eigen DA. We have multiple DA solutions that are building focused on that. It's really about the next generation of applications that are going to be built on chain, which are going to require much higher technical capabilities if we want to actually onboard general users to crypto. And I think the most important thing is I love Gary Tan's quote about this, which is like the only thing that matters is building stuff that people want, and we need to make a dent in building the infrastructure and rails that people can then go about onboarding these users and eventually increasing that total addressable market, which rising tides lift all boats, and there is going to be multiple winners, and we believe in positive sum games.
Keone?
Yeah, I agree. I think that for each team, there needs to be significant focus and specialization to deliver something great. Within the Monad team, we are laser focused on improving state access, which is the single biggest bottleneck for execution, through this new database, which we call MonadDB. More recently, with some of the newer project announcements, I've been hearing XYZDB or ABCDB. So I think there's a lot of new interest in databases now. And that's due to a greater realization of the fact that blockchains inherently are distributed databases with a layer of logic on top of them, and we need to actually address that fundamental database issue. But our team has been doing a lot of work there. Just more generally, I think that I can see that we have the roadmap of within the crypto space in general of horizontal scaling with separate let's say layer one or blockchain environments that are all adjacent to each other, and then we have the roll up or fractal scaling approach where there's some element of commitment of state from one blockchain to another, and it's clear that we have some of that connectivity and the map out there. Now we need the pieces to individually be as performant as possible and as secure as possible, which I think the projects that you two guys are representing really contribute to as well.
Before we go to Nick, would you define state access for the audience real quick?
Sure. So take, for example, a typical transaction like a Uniswap V2 swap. It's a pretty simple amount of computation. It's a little bit of addition, a little bit of multiplication and division. But the more costly part is actually looking up all of the state variables for that contract, before that transaction happens, and those state variables live generally on SSD. And the cool thing about SSDs is that they're quite high bandwidth. You can think of it as a bottle with a wide bottleneck, but they're high latency relative to memory. So in order to utilize the SSD, all of its capabilities, like a typical SSD has over 1 million I/O operations per second. So in order to utilize all that capability, you need software that can efficiently access all of the state variables that all of the transactions that are in that block depend upon in the most efficient way possible.
Thank you. Nick?
I think that restaking is sort of like its own category compared to, let's say, like modularity or even like scaling a monolithic chain. I think restaking is sort of like a tool set for potentially launching new protocols without having the overhead of needing to issue your own new token, which I think is a big, is an innovation that is going to be helpful for people. But I think that ultimately, in terms of like actually scaling the throughput of chains, which is a separate topic, I'm obviously pretty convinced that going the modular route is the right approach, because you fundamentally can scale the L1 more efficiently when you do less. So when you don't have to do execution on the L1, you can increase the throughput using like just very simple bandwidth optimizations, optimizing the mempool and things like that. That Celestia we just released our roadmap a couple weeks ago, and like all of the scaling problems are, fortunately, we don't have to deal with any of the execution layer scaling stuff. So our scaling roadmap is a lot more straightforward and simple. And then even if you could scale a monolithic chain significantly, there's always going to be limits where you're not going to be able to run the entire world's Web3 needs on a single execution layer, because it just you're going to run into just the limits of how many transactions a single machine can process. And so when you split things up you kind of shard things into separate execution layers, you get to benefit from parallelization and increase the overall throughput that way. And the only sacrifice is you don't have atomic synchronous composability. But that's not really that big of a trade-off, I think, for many applications.
So in practice, what does that look like? Let's say I've built a blazingly fast blockchain, but I don't want to have to deal with the data layer. How does that connect with you?
Yeah, so for example, we have a project called Eclipse, which is they basically took the Solana virtual machine, which is fast, has parallel execution, all these things, and they turned it into an execution layer. So they took out all the consensus part. They run a sequencer, and users send transactions there. They all get processed, and eventually all the blocks get batched and posted to Celestia, where they get like actual consensus with strong economic security, and they get data availability over those blocks. So Celestia, you can think of Celestia as just an interface where rollups publish data and retrieve data, and that data gets ordered, meaning there's consensus that's enforced, and then there's strong data availability guarantees.
So one thing you touched on there, which is a topic I want to speak with each of you on, is about tokens. The tokens are these coordination mechanisms across these protocols and networks you guys are building. I'd like to know how each of you think about tokens in regards to what you're building and what the meaning that they will have for what you're building is, starting with Keone.
Yeah, I think that fundamentally a blockchain is like a public good, like a park in the middle of the city in some senses, where there's limited, even with all the improvements that Monad or other projects are delivering, there's still a finite amount of block space, and that block space needs to be priced appropriately. So the role of a token in a blockchain is spam prevention, as well as resource management and resource pricing. Quite important from the overall perspective of keeping the swim lanes clear, so that important economic activity can. Is he running a light node right now?
Yeah, I'm running a light node.
Okay, I was just curious about that.
Sorry.
What was the most interesting gadget that you ran a light node on recently?
I I haven't been doing too much recently, but the most interesting things I've run it on are Kindle and Nintendo Switch or like Play or whatever. Sorry, didn't
You
mean
guys
to
have
interrupt.
No, you're good. You're good.
Oh,
That was
right.
good.
I don't think anyone's run one on a watch yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
We go next.
iOS is actually, well, now there's a browser on a watch, so you probably could. But anyway, sorry to distract the panel.
No, not at all. By the way, he's running a light node, which is what he was showing the audience there with the photo.
Yeah.
Do you want to wrap up?
No, I think I'm good. Yeah.
For sure. I would say in terms of like what is the value prop of tokens and like what we're thinking about, totally agree with Keone there in terms of the public goods of blockchains. We see it as a way to make credible commitments in a immutable manner. So, platforms that behave in sort of, a very structured manner of saying we're going to only take certain percentage from the community based on some sort of credible commitment that we're going to make. Blockchains are really good for that, and tokens are a way of representing that. We also, the Eigen token has this intersubjective component to it, so we see 3 types of, attributable, faults in crypto. There's objective, there's subjective, and intersubjective, right? So there's objective truths, which we can all agree upon, something like, mathematical operations where there's only one definite answer. There's subjective, which is, something that often requires like some form of social consensus and like might not even be useful to come to some consensus on. And then there's this like middle ground of intersubjective consensus, which is where, we, through a process of social agreement, say that we're going to accept something and we might need to modify that later. So the Eigen token is kind of designed to be a system by which any of the services or any rollups or projects can essentially use the Eigen token to resolve any of the social consensus problems that exist. And rather than escalating them to the base layer of Ethereum where things get more expensive, more complicated, we've created a system by which we can handle those essentially in a subset of Ethereum security in a lot more efficient manner. And you can still move at the pace that you need to while resolving some of these issues. An example would be like something that we both look at in terms of the data withholding problem, and we have like different approaches to that, right? Sampling's one of the approaches, and we look at it from the social consensus problem, which is the same thing, like the root cause, and just a different way of looking at it, which we've implemented into EigenDA that's also similar to a data availability service with slightly different paradigms that underpin how we've designed them.
So Celestia has the TIA token, which is, you could think of it similar to, the token for any other L1, like Ethereum or Solana, for example. You use it to stake to secure the network. So if the validators, break consensus or they try to withhold data, they will be slashed. So it provides economic security. It's also the gas token. So when you want to post data to Celestia or otherwise use the network, you have to pay in the TIA token. And we're also seeing the ecosystem using the TIA token for pricing NFTs or for as a gas token for the rollups built on top of it. So it's sort of like this ecosystem-wide sort of like money and utility/security token.
So historically, we've seen that the strongest communities in crypto have come from places where there were strong wealth effects generated in the participants of those networks or protocols. So Bitcoin's a perfect example, or Ethereum, where there was the ICO. But over time, there's been a large shift due to the amount of capital required to get these things off the ground, due to regulatory nature of the world, and all of these different things, which are essentially, your token's already live, Nick, but these two are not yet fully out in the wild. Mm-hmm. But they will all have very high FDVs, like these fully diluted valuations. And I'm curious how you guys think about the growth of the community or the ecosystem, where the wealth effects of the community members may be dampened from that perspective of not being able to necessarily participate at an earlier point in time. Vyas, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, absolutely. We have this restaking component, which is where Ethereum stakers deposit their Ethereum into EigenLayer, and they can essentially earn extra yield for participating in additional validation for these services. And you touched on there is a lot more capital in the space today, but the reality is there's a lot of it's about rewarding the right user groups. It's not necessarily about like, you know, the ability to enter into these rising markets very early on, but rather how do you reward valuable contributing members of your community and avoid, you know, civil attacks where you essentially have mercenary capital with unreasonable expectation, which kind of goes from project to project with like a high level of liquidity rotation, trying to identify where they can, you know, maximize their earning potential and, you know, respect to that approach. But the reality is like most of the time, if you're getting these unreasonable yield expectations, that's not a sustainable emission for any of these projects. And so as we kind of go about, you know, launching our token, releasing it to the public, it's really how do we make sure that the honest minority and the actual valuable contributors of a community that are builders, that are you know, your community members that are evangelizing your products for you, these are the people that are being rewarded effectively, and they are able to, you know, essentially accrue an amount of wealth that grows based on their valuable contributions.
Nick?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, you know, there's like the chart that Masari has put out in the past about like the amount of public distribution or sort of like public sales has like dropped over time, and it's specifically basically after the 2017-18 like ICO boom, that's where everything dropped, and the reason is because of regulation. Like there's actually no feasible way to do a compliant like public sale of a token these days. And so what that means, but then if you're launching an L1, like you pointed out, you have to raise a lot of money. It's a lot of, takes a high capital expense to launch a new network. And so you end up having to like raise from venture capital funds and things like that. And so it's just kind of like an unfortunate reality of the regulatory structure. And hopefully, maybe that will like change at some point. Maybe we'll get more clarity or something. Because I do think that, frankly, ICOs or just like having the like early public participation is actually so much healthier for the network on so many levels. So I do have a bit of like ICO envy. Now, the cool thing is that we also have sort of developed, in response to that, different public distribution mechanisms like airdrops. And I think that airdrops are, if used correctly, can be you know, extremely beneficial as like a community sort of acquisition tool. And so that's something that we think about a lot, is like what are the other avenues to like get you know, get the distribution out there.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, the thing that is really special about crypto is the strength of the community overall. That's the single biggest reason why I believe that crypto will prevail, is that we just have so many people that are so passionate about the values of crypto, decentralization, self-sovereignty, censorship resistance, and having fun. And those can all coexist, and people can you know, embrace all of them, and you know, pretty much every day like log into crypto Twitter and think about crypto for you know, several hours a day. It's just so immersive, and I think that the power of community will ultimately carry crypto forward and help decentralized tech spread to the rest of the world. So you know, I think with respect to new token launches, just in general, I think it's important that any project really value their community very highly and prioritize finding ways to ultimately reflect the power of the community and the transformative nature of community in crypto.
If you don't mind me just like hopping on top of that, I love the Monad community. I think like you guys do one of the best jobs at like engaging with, you know, the people that are actually contributing. But you touched on like crypto Twitter, you touched on like the crypto community, and there's a lot of values that like do matter, but to some extent, like the percentage of us today is like very small in fraction to what it could be in the future.
Yeah.
Where do you think, or like what sort of strategies are you guys thinking about in terms of how we take this to, you know, we're all talking about how do we onboard the next generation of on-chain users. Where do you, like, how do you think about how do we take some of these values and expand them and, you know, evangelize them to the general population and start bringing some of them on board?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a two-pronged approach in my mind, maybe even more than that. But One prong is it's all about ultimately the applications and the user acquisition flywheels that the best applications can develop, the ways that they gain mind share in the broader space. I think Polymarket is a great example where literally, as we go into this election, every single news outlet is constantly quoting Trump's odds or Harris's odds improved on Polymarket. That's just incredible marketing and incredible user acquisition for that specific project, but then just more generally for crypto. So I think that's one prong, and then I think the other one is just related to, the kind of common sense of grassroots, like people telling their friends. Within the Monad community, we've had seen a ton of success from individual regional communities growing from people just inviting their friends to come hang out and meet their friends that they met online through regional communities within the Monad community.
Cool. Do you have a follow-up? Okay, the next one is perhaps more for the audience. I know there's probably a lot of builders here, founders, folks that are working in crypto or desiring to work in crypto. Each of you work with many different teams because at the end of the day, the value of your networks and protocol depend on how many people come and build interesting things. I'd love for you each to share what you look for when you find a team that you feel compelled to get behind and support them and think that there's something that's good to be built on your network or around your protocol, starting with Nick.
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that, frankly, a single ecosystem can be made by just one single application that gets built on top of it. Like with Solana, I think really the breakout use case has been pump.fun. With Ethereum, it kind of came down to Uniswap, maybe some of the other big DeFi players like Compound or Aave or something. So I think it's hard to know in advance which one of these teams or applications is going to be the thing that is the breakout use case. But I think that it's pretty consistent that they need to kind of be sort of well-rounded. They need to be real founders. The interesting thing is when you're building an L1 ecosystem, you need to attract other teams that need to take a risk on you. So they have to be willing to be a startup on top of a startup, basically. But so you have to look for all the same qualities you would in any founding team, as if you were a venture investor or something like that. But they need to be technical. They need to have an eye towards community and be sort of crypto native and understand how to communicate and market themselves and brand themselves. And then there needs to be some core idea that's really valuable. Specifically within Celestia, we're really excited about cypherpunk style applications too, because we think that we're finally entering a stage where the infrastructure is mature enough to enable some of the original use cases that people wanted to do on crypto rails, things like payments. So working with teams who have a really exciting vision for private stablecoin payments, or just yesterday there was a team that announced they're building this truly end-to-end encrypted messaging app on Celestia. And it's things like this that get us excited, when there's something net new, because I think that's also we could copy all the DeFi protocols or NFT stuff, which there are teams building those things, but what is the new thing that you can only do on Celestia, for example? And that's a harder thing to figure out.
And one little add-on before we go to the next: how do these teams get your guys' attention? How can they get you to see what they're building?
That's a great question. I think a lot of the time, we end up interacting with them on Twitter or somehow getting in touch with them through our broader network, I would say. Sometimes it's obvious because they're already building a roll-up or something that's very relevant to Celestia, but I don't know. We don't have a Google form or I don't really have a good answer. I think we're just we're always on the lookout and always having our ears open. And I think we're very approachable and accessible.
Yeah. So any founders or potential founders, be very active on Twitter. It matters a lot. Vyas, go next.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Nick said in terms of, to some extent, thinking about it from a venture capital mindset of you don't necessarily know if a team is going to have what they see as product market fit versus what I would describe as like proof of product market fit, right? You start out building something, and the reality is sometimes your customers really need something else, and so it's really this like multifaceted approach of like initially, EigenLayer, we're focused on like converting cloud to crypto, right? So we're building this like cloud type infrastructure, but for Web3, and so a lot of the early teams were other infrastructure projects that were deploying on top of us, and then step 2 was going downstream to all of these infrastructure projects, and now we're looking at the dApps and the projects that are being built on top of them. Like Nick said, startups on top of startups, right? So it's really about openness. Like DMs are always open, accessibility, and then you start thinking about like one thing Keone touched on is this fun element. Like I think fun always sells.
Yeah.
People want to engage with things that are like exciting, that are fun, and like that's the reality of like most consumer applications today, because there's some sort of like engaging component to it. And so you start going downstream to the next layer, and I think at the end of the day, like if we can have a few winners in an ecosystem, that can make or break the entire ecosystem. And so there's this dominant narrative recently about like this overabundance of infrastructure, and in my opinion, most of the infrastructure will get abstracted away, and consumers should not be interacting with it. It should just be behind the scenes, similar to how when you're using a Web2 application today, you don't realize that it's running on AWS, or your sign in with Google is just done through OAuth, but like nobody thinks about OAuth. Nobody thinks about Stripe as your payment processor. It just works. It just happens, and it gets abstracted away for the user. And so it's really about how do we take all this stuff, abstract it away, and like make it as easy and as engaging as possible for end users, and then working backwards from that, you build the infrastructure that can support those use cases.
Yeah, for me, I think it comes down to some of the kind of classic startup advice, which are really around iterating fast, getting feedback, failing fast, and really just trying to get the product in the hands of users and figure out what things users actually really want. The other thing that really comes to mind is just the parable about the man who traded from, or maybe it was a woman, but the person who traded from a paperclip to a house just by making successive good trades. I think that startups are just about like leveraging the strengths that you have and then leveraging that into a new strength that you maybe did not have before. So I think in the context of early stage crypto startups, that's just related to shipping the product quickly and getting quick feedback, and then utilizing that to get more momentum to then help grow the team, help raise funds, help create more momentum, and the whole time building toward this singular vision that involves building an app that can cross the chasm to mainstream adoption.
Yeah. Two things actually I want to add. One is that I think you can really do yourself a disservice if you over-index on attracting teams to build on your protocol via grants or something. Like if people are being paid to use your product, then you're not actually getting real feedback, and you're not actually being able to observe whether or not your product has product market fit. Like it's all like fabricated, and it kind of clouds your ability to evaluate that. The second thing is, in terms of teams that like, something that I look for is like, are they actually passionate and like committed to crypto for the long term? Because I think there's a lot of people who, like some of the teams we've been working with have been working on their project for over 2 years. And we've been working side by side with them for 2+ years. And you need to have that level of commitment sometimes to ship a product in crypto. And if you're not ready for that level of a journey, then don't waste your time, and also don't waste our time.
Absolutely. I would also add that like, if you're a founder, if you're a builder in the early stages, and even as you get more mature, you should be on some of these outreach BD calls like very early on, because I think David Phelps had a really good tweet about this the other day, where it's like, these are product feedback sessions. And so like the more time that you're spending with your customers, your iteration cycle improves, your feedback improves, and now all of a sudden you are like improving at a much, like the innovation rate just dramatically increases. Whereas like if you start distancing yourself away from that, which at some point scale, focus theory, you might have to, you need to have really strong people that are engaging with again, what is your like building community, right? Like your builders are equally, if not more important, role in your community.
So two sort of quick fire questions here before we close out. The first one was, given infinite time and resources, what is the second most interesting problem you would be solving outside of what you're currently working on, starting with Keone?
Does it have to be in crypto, or can it be anything?
It could be anything. Ideally crypto, but if it's something else, happy to hear it. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, for me it'd be climate change.
Okay.
I think it's really important. Really a bit of a tragedy to the commons kind of situation.
Yeah, I would say this is like an abstract answer, but like I think we could. I would be focused still on some sort of coordination mechanism. I think like the better we can coordinate as a society, like the faster we're going to be able to tackle some of these like more larger issues at hand. And so like if we can come up with a more effective, human coordination problem, like coordination systems, then some of the coordination problems that are required will just like be able to be resolved much faster.
I think one thing that could be interesting to work on is just health generally. Like I think there's a lot of very simple, quick fixes that we could improve our food system. We could improve the way that sort of the healthcare system is designed. That could lead to like significantly better health outcomes for everyone, as well as just like less money wasted down this like I don't know, sort of the wasted down like spending on all this like expensive healthcare stuff. So.
Okay, I think we'll actually have time for two more. So the follow-up one is, what is the project outside of obviously what you are building that you find most interesting or that you spend time thinking about, starting with Vyas?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, we're very bullish on a lot of the teams right now in the AI space. I think decentralized AI makes a lot of sense, especially as we go faster.
Any specific team?
We spend a lot of time with like Sentient, Ritual, a few of those teams. I love the Bagel Network guys. Yeah, all of the above. I would just say like more so from the problem of how do we start thinking about as we get closer and closer to AGI and malicious actors start contributing negative data to these models, coming up with the rogue agents. How do you create systems that can essentially like identify verifiably who was contributing some of those negative behaviors and slash them, or like come up with like negative repercussions for those behaviors? So I think that's like something that's top.
Keone?
I'd really like to see global FX move on chain because it's a massive market with a lot of middlemen that it just capture significant spreads and so just any team that's working in the global FX space, moving stable coins all on chain.
Nick?
I think I spend the most time thinking about chain abstraction, and within that maybe like intents. So chain abstraction is about trying to abstract away all the complexities of all these different blockchains, whether modular or monolithic, to the user so that they have this unified, very seamless experience when they're onboarding or using crypto. And there's just a lot of exciting stuff going on in that space.
Okay, with 20 seconds, what is one habit or practice that has significantly improved each of your lives and that make you be better founders?
Making sure to just exercise every day.
I'd say meditation, like breathing, like work on your breath, work on breath work, control your mind.
Keone?
Proactive communication and sending really fast Slack messages to teammates.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you for listening. Thank you to the speakers.